Final Collection Part 52. Finally doing a new addition into this part, as it's been quite a while since the last inclusion, almost 3 months ago. And like always, 15 records will be showcased here. All the new additions from closing out, I believe, the letter C and moving on to D. And other than that, one thing to really point out that's quite surprising is that metal's actually in the minority here in terms of the records being shown. And before we get into this pile of records to talk about, if you're wondering what's playing in the background, it's going to be this little gem right here by Harsh Symmetry Display Model. This is a one-man darkwave project, I believe, based out of California. And I may not know much about darkwave music, but after seeing a handful of people sharing this on my timeline and giving it, a chance, giving curiosity, letting them get the better of me, really enjoyed this quite a bit. Really catchy, really anthemic darkwave music that also takes influence from post-punk and that 80s era goth sound. Overall, really good stuff, and if any of that sounds appealing, definitely check this out. Kicking off this Final Collection part is going to be Current 93 with the latest full-length album, If a City is Set Upon a Hill. One of my personal favorite albums of last year in 2022, and I actually got this recently when Clara and I went to Salem about a few weeks ago, and we stopped upon a record store. They didn't have much in the metal section that really interested me, but in their independent music section, surprisingly they had Current 93, and I figured I'd jump on it while I can. Again, this is all of the sounds and styles you're used to hearing with Current 93 when they go down the straightforward neo-folk approach, as you got David Tibet's style of singing that sounds more like a narrative, and his guitar playing on here is still, for the most part, more of like a backdrop, but it's a little bit more melodic than I'm used to hearing. Still, everything's well played. And the only other thing to point out here is in terms of atmosphere, when it gets to the more of the electronic and experimental parts that are kind of like scattered throughout, nothing too, over the top like other albums in the Current 93 discography, it kind of gets into the realms of chamber folk. But again, if you want another great addition, the neo-folk approach of Current 93, definitely check this out. The only other thing to point out here is, from what I've heard, this is supposedly like the last record by Current 93, but who knows? I mean, the project's been going on now for, I think, almost like at least 3.5 decades, maybe even 4 decades if I'm not mistaken. No, David Tibet's been writing music for a long time, so I'm honestly surprised the guy's still making stuff, and to be at this quality, gotta give it up to David Tibet. But yeah, other than that, for the layout and packaging with this, you have album artwork, backside with more additional artwork. Comes with an insert sheet, lyrics on one side, credits on the other, and this final pressing comes on crystal clear LP. Closing out the C's is going to be Cynic with their debut full-length album from 1993, Focus. I've been waiting years to get this on vinyl. I believe, it was Roadrunner who did a repress like 5 or so years ago. I didn't hear about it, and when I found out, it was too little too late, as all of their copies were sold out, and they were going for like dumb inflated prices on Discogs, and I figured I'd miss my opportunity. But Lord and behold, Roadrunner again announced another repress and jumped on this copy that I think it came out like back in 2021 or 2022. I know it's just very recent, and so ecstatic to finally own this gem of Floridian death metal. And I know in terms of their influence and innovation, in the Florida death metal scene, it's regarded as another gem. But I think for death metal as a whole, this really pushed the boundaries. Because in 1993, and again, just the early 90s itself, a lot of death metal bands were just so focused on being ultra aggressive, super hellish and brutal and all of that shit. And Cynic went in a completely different direction, which was quite bold for them, because I'm pretty sure everything past this, they were more of like a thrash metal band, which is very odd. But for them to make this progressive, death metal album with elements and influence of like psychedelic rock, it really pushed the boundaries and opened up the floodgates for more innovation to come in death metal. And although when people were talking about progressive death metal and experimental death metal, this is regarded in high praise, but I think overall for death metal itself, it still doesn't get the recognition that it truly deserves. But maybe that's me being a little bit biased because my personal favorite album of theirs, which I know is a hot take because Focus is the fan favorite, is Traced in Air. But still, I think Focus, their debut full-length album, doesn't get enough love. Other than that, for the tracks on here, everything is stellar. Veil of Maya, the opening song, which I know the band Veil of Maya, that's where they got their name for their band, and they take influence from this album, really just sets the tone right off the bat that you're experiencing death metal in a whole different dimension. Other great tracks, Celestial Voyage, The Eagle, Nature, Textures, How Could I, just all grade A material. And this is coming from me, someone who really doesn't care for, progressive death metal. This just shatters what I understand of it, and it will always be, in my personal view, like top tier progressive death metal. But yeah, after me gushing over this record for now like almost 2.5 minutes, as to where you can get this, I would say check Roadrunner Records, but they're probably sold out by now. But that's the best bet. Other than that, for the layout and packaging with this, you have album artwork, backside with the track listings and band photo. Comes on a printed inner sleeve, one side with a band photo collage, other side with lyrics. And this vinyl pressing comes on yellow LP. Starting off, the D's is going to be Daughters with their debut full-length album, Canada Songs. When I saw that this was getting a repress about 2 or 3 years ago, jumped on it immediately, and I've had this now for quite a while. I'm finally talking about it. But yeah, Daughters, a band that's mostly known for being this mixture between math rock and hardcore, really similar to that, something like, I don't know, the Dillinger Escape Plan, was a grindcore band when they started out, and I believe they formed after their previous band disbanded, that being like As the Sun Sets or something like that, and that was also a grindcore band. And they carry that influence and style onto their debut full-length album, and it just radiates such grindcore energy. For example, I believe this album's only like 10 or 12 minutes long, and when you look at some of these song titles, it gives off like anal cunt energy. The third song on here, I Slept with Daughters, and all I got was this lousy song written about me. That literally sounds like an anal cunt track. Or I Don't Give a Shit About Wood, I'm Not a Chemist, Pants Meat Shit, Damn Those Bloodsuckers and Their Good Qualities. Like, these song titles are just really, random and lowbrow how they come off. But yeah, Daughters started out as a grindcore band, and what's interesting is even at their humble beginnings, they always had some influence and a mixture embedded into their sound of math rock. It's showcased on here that reminds me a bit of Discordant's Axis, but I know it's kind of cliche to compare every technical sounding grindcore band to them. But yeah, Discordant's Axis, you can kind of hear it a little bit on this album. But just overall happy that this finally got a repress. But for the band itself, Daughters, I know they're like long gone dead after I believe the vocalist, I can't think of his name, went through quite a bit of shit after hearing about some of the allegations against him, which I'm not going to spread all like drama and rumors. If you know of it, you know of it. But yeah, other than that, for the layout and packaging with this record, you have album artwork, backside with the track listings. Comes on a printed inner sleeve. One side is just artwork, and the other side is just all the lyrics to every song, and just comes on standard black vinyl. Next is Dead Can Dance with their debut full-length album, that is their self-titled, from I believe 1984. Now Dead Can Dance are originally from I believe Melbourne, Australia, and they are considered to be the pioneers and godfathers to that of what is considered the style of music of neo-classical dark wave. However, with their debut full-length album right here, there isn't really any sense of neoclassical just yet, but the style of darkwave and especially post-punk is very predominant on this album, probably because that style of music was starting to gain more traction around that time, again in the mid to early 80s. But what's really interesting about Dead Can Dance is their two members, I believe their names are Brendan Perry and Lisa Gerrard, they make music, but not in the sense like they're writing it as a band. They make music in the sense that they're conductors orchestrating an orchestra, especially when you check out their albums past this one right here. Because with their self-titled debut, it's played more as if they were a band, especially a post-punk band. But still, nonetheless, there's really great stuff to enjoy on this album. Again, especially if you enjoy post-punk, in the vein, again, of like Joy Division and stuff like that. Tracks on here like Frontier, The Trial, East of Eden, my personal favorite song on the album, and Threshold. Very, very well-written stuff. And just overall, it's a stellar album. Not my personal favorite, but still happy to have in the collection. As to where you can get this, I'm pretty sure their label that they run, 4AD, still carries copies on their web store, so go there if you want to score a copy. As for the layout and packaging with this right here, you got album artwork, backside with the track listings. Comes on a printed inner sleeve, silver paper, track listings on the other side, and it's just on standard black vinyl. Then I have their sophomore full-length album. This is Dead Can Dance once again with Spleen and Ideal. This is now where they become a neoclassical darkwave sounding project, as really they're not having any more post-punk influence. And as I just stated, the neoclassical influence becomes very noticeable on this album. And then again, they sound a lot more like conductors and not so much as if they're writing music like a band. And man, this album is just magnificent from beginning to end. I'm having a difficult time right now saying which is my personal favorite Dead Can Dance album, but I can see as to why this is kind of considered like the fan favorite, along with the next record I'm about to be talking about. But damn, it is so good. Tracks on here like Ascension, Mesmerism, which is my personal favorite song, Avatar, Indoctrination. It is just glorious and very, serene and blissful sounding. Again, neoclassical darkwave music. So good, and highly would recommend this to anyone who wants to, know what those styles of music sound like together. This is arguably the best place to start. And one thing that's quite interesting is Lisa Gerrard, who does also obviously vocals for Dead Can Dance. I'm pretty sure sometimes when she sings, just like the Cocteau Twins, she does it in like gibberish, like she just starts like, humming or doing all of this like gibberish style of singing, and it just really adds to the blissful, serene nature, which I don't know, I just really enjoy a lot, and probably as to why my favorite song on here, Mesmerism, showcases that to its fullest extent. Again, just a stellar album, and if you want to grab a copy, go to 4AD, their web store label, to score one. As for the layout and packaging, you have album artwork, backside with the track listings. Comes on a printed inner sleeve, one side with credits, other side again with the track listings, and it's just on a standard black vinyl. And the last record I have by Dead Can Dance as of right now is their third full-length album, Within the Realm of a Dying Sun. This is where Dead Can Dance gets a lot more emotive sounding with their approach of neoclassical darkwave, and it is just spectacular. Songs on here like In the Wake of Adversity, Xavier, Dawn of the Iconoclast. It's just like, how can you not feel something? Because the production value, the songwriting, and how everything's composed, it just oozes such dread and a strong melancholic atmosphere that it's just so good. Everything about this album is incredible. And funny enough, with their approach in the realms of electronic music, this would actually influence quite a handful of metal bands that want to go the same route, but in the black metal sense. For example, Varg of Burzum, out of all people, took great influence from Dead Can Dance, and I'm pretty sure it's a safe bet to assume, not actually assume, but they were influenced by darkwave music. Summoning was influenced by Dead Can Dance, because again, when you listen to tracks like Windfall and Xavier and you hear how it's composed, it honestly sounds like a Summoning song without like the black metal atmosphere. So it's a safe bet to assume that Dead Can Dance also influenced Summoning, which is mega bonus points for them, as you know, I'm quite a big Summoning fan. But yeah, if you're a fan of Burzum or Summoning, or any kind of like black metal band that's ambient with their usage on how they write music, listen to Dead Can Dance, and I can guarantee you'll notice the influence that those bands took from these guys. But yeah, just an incredible album that I would highly recommend to anyone who wants to get into neoclassical darkwave. And yeah, once again, got this through 4AD, their web store, so again, go there if you want to score a copy. As for the layout and packaging with this album, you have album artwork, backside with the track listings. Comes on an insert sheet, again, with silver paper, and the other side is just the credits and track listings once again, and just comes on a standard black vinyl. Up next is the very, very infamous Death in June. This is their sophomore full-length album, Burial. As of right now, I'm missing their debut full-length album, which is, I think, The Guilty Have No Pride is the name of it, I think. It's the album with the very infamous Totenkopf skull on the album artwork. But Death in June are considered to be the pioneers of what is neo-folk, yet when they started out, they weren't technically that, as Death in June was more of a band that played around with styles of, again, post-punk and new wave music, but they were starting to flesh in more folk music as time went on. Now, originally, I believe, as it goes, when they were a band, it's because they formed after the previous band that disbanded, which was Crisis, a UK-based punk band that had a lot of left-leaning ideas of, in terms of politics. They were very left-wing. Yet Death in June, it's a big contrast now because there's a lot more right-wing ideas and narratives being presented. I think it all has to do because Douglas P. had a lot of fascination with World War II, and he brings these ideas and concepts to light, and it starts to get very touchy and sketchy as you dive into the body of work. But Burial, this is where, again, it's quite experimental and not really the best place to start out. I mean, songs on here like, I don't know, Sons of Europe and Till the Living Flesh is Burned. I think those are the really two only tracks on here that I really like. Everything else is just very weird and abstract takes on post-punk music. Yeah, I'll give them an A for effort in terms of ambition, but it's not really anything I think people would ever say is their standout album. But I got it for a good price at a record store. I think I only paid $20, so I'm complaining. But yeah, for people who know Death in June, this is nowhere near considered their best work. But as for the layout and packaging with this album, you have album artwork, and the layout's kind of weird because it's all like this kind of like embedded jacket coat on it, which is gives like a cool look to it, but it's quite weird, the feel of it. Backside, you have the track listings. This is hand numbered. I got copy 580 out of 1000, and this LP edition comes on blue vinyl. And I have their follow-up full length, that being Nada. This is where they stick the landing on the post-punk approach, and it is sensational. It is such a good album. Again, it's still bleeding out some of the ideas of what we consider to be neo-folk, but I wouldn't call this a neo-folk album. It's only certain tracks on here. When Douglas P. does any of his acoustic guitar playing and it's just him, That's the neo-folk. Everything else is post-punk. The standout track on here that everyone knows is the second song called The Calling. And I know it's not Douglas singing, it's one of the other members, and his name's escaping me. But man, it is such an anthemic sounding song that is great post-punk music to check out. If you ever check out Nada, check out the song The Calling. That's the standout track. But yeah, sadly this is a bootleg. The seller on Discogs says it was a legit copy, and after looking at it and realizing that it says on the bottom June Records, which is not a real label, I realized this was a bootleg and I was pretty bummed about it, but whatever. I mean, you only charged I think like 25-ish bucks, and original copies go for substantially more, so I'm not complaining that much. But yeah, it's a bootleg, what can you say? But yeah, other than that, for the layout and packaging on this, you have album artwork, backside with the track listings. Comes with an insert sheet. You got the Death in June logo on one side, and the other side it includes the lyrics, which is kind of nice because typically bootlegs come with nothing but the record. And the vinyl itself comes again on blue LP. And after owning it for 2 years, I finally get to talk about it. Once again, Death in June, but this is the album that most people know of them for being But What Ends When the Symbols Shatter. Come on, what more do I need to say? Little Black Angel, Because of Him, The Mourner's Bench, He's Disabled, Coo, This Is Not Paradise, Howls of Devotion. It's like, just those song titles that I announced, that's all the description you need to know as to why this album is just so beloved, and arguably like the staple album if you want to know what just neo-folk is from like the simplest terms. It is such an incredible, enchanting, and mystical album that I'm not going to waste my breath talking about it anymore. You should just, again, you should all know of this if you know what neo-folk is as a whole. That's all that needs to be said. This is a legit copy put out through New European Records, and yeah, everything else should speak for itself. It's not in the most mint condition as, well, I think it only got 2 pressings, and the second press was only like a year or 2 apart from the original press, but this is a first press. Other variant, I believe, comes in like purple, but mine comes on just the standard black. As for the layout and packaging on it, you have the very recognizable album artwork, backside with the track listings. Comes with an insert sheet, both sides have lyrics. Folds out with just more additional lyrics and photography of Douglas P. This also includes a printed inner sleeve, one side with the album title, other side with additional artwork. And I'll even showcase the vinyl, which I know is just plain black, but really cool to look at the labels of this album. Getting back into extreme metal territory, up next is Death Karma, their debut full-length album, History of Death and Burial Rituals Part 1. This is an extreme metal band, I believe, based out of the Czech Republic, and what really caught my eye about them is that it has the members of Cult of Fire playing on this, and just like Cult of Fire, it's very atmospheric and epic sounding in scope, how just cataclysmic their black metal's power is with their writing approach. However, on this album, there's more of a death metal kick to it. So if you enjoy Cult of Fire but you want more death metal influence, strongly urge you check out Death Karma. Really, really good stuff. That, again, it's just so cataclysmic and massive, epic, and atmospheric sounding. And those guys, they can write some killer black metal. But yeah, surprisingly, I found this at a local record shop around my area and snagged it up immediately, because Death Karma, really hard to come by, as usually the main focus for the band is Cult of Fire. But yeah, other than that, the layout and packaging for this is really cool. You see, you have the regular album artwork right here of this kind of like big cathedral thing. Backside, just additional artwork. And actually, this is kind of like the outer shell to it because this paper folds around it. And then this is where you'll get, just kind of like the cover for it. It's paper thin, but gotta be careful with that. Then you get more additional artwork, I believe. Yeah, that is the band logo right there. Album title at the bottom. Backside with just all the track listings. Put out through Iron Bonehead, which is surprising because this is when they really went above and beyond with their packaging. But Cultifier always usually does some really cool layouts with their stuff. Gatefold has a booklet stapled inside, so you just get more additional artwork. You get the gist of it. Again, really, really cool packaging with this. And I believe this also comes with a poster shaped like a coffin. Yeah, it's really cool. Also includes this coffin-shaped poster. Really, really cool. And as for the vinyl variant, it comes on bone white. I believe this is the limited variant. I believe the limitation is 100 copies, if I'm not mistaken. I also got Deathspell Omega with their latest full-length album, The Long Defeat. I'm not going to talk about this album too much, as I just did an explaining video all about Deathspell Omega. I'm glad that you guys really enjoyed that video. But The Long Defeat, honestly, I've only spun this like maybe 2 or 3 times. Kind of a bit underwhelming considering how great the Furnaces of Palagonesia was before it. And it just feels like a slow burn album, and the standout features about it is that it has guest vocals, I believe both from what you guys told me. One of the members, or I should say the vocalist of Marduk, the vocalist of Funeral Mist, and the vocalist of Mugwa contribute guest spots on this, which, I mean, that's kind of shaking things up. But other than that, it just feels like a slow burn album. It feels a bit more dreadful, and it doesn't have all of the characteristics that I would usually expect in a modern day Deathspell Omega album. But maybe I gotta let it sink in a little bit more, as again, Deathspell Omega are not really a band to be cliche or to, always do the same exact thing. They're always trying to be, experimental and ambitious, and in that standpoint, I guess they kind of keep the listener on their toes. But it's nothing that I would say I'm head over heels for, but had to get it to be a completionist. Other than that, for the layout and packaging with it, you have album artwork, backside with the band logo and track listings, comes with 2 cards, along with a big ass booklet that just has all the lyrics and additional artwork, and folds out into this big pamphlet basically. And the vinyl itself is just on standard black LP. Proceeding onward to an album that everyone and their mothers has talked about, and who can blame them. But up next is Demigod with their debut full-length album, Slumber of Sullen Eyes. Come on, if you're a death metal fan, you should all know of this album. To anyone who enjoys death metal, legendary stuff whenever the conversation is brought up of Finnish death metal, and would be influential in the scene for decades to come, because it seems like any band that labels itself, or people categorize it as like retro death metal, tend to take influence off of this album, especially Blood Incantation and bands of the like. Because I mean, everything, the riffs, the atmosphere, the vocals, the performance, the execution, the production value is everything you would want in 90s death metal done to just grade A. It's an incredible album that deserves all the recognition and love that it gets throughout the years. The only thing I will say though is that I feel like people only take notice of Slumber of Sullen Eyes and tend to ignore everything else that Demigod has done. Because even their follow-up album, I know that came out in like the early 2000s, I think it's like Dark Mechanics. Even though it's not as good, I think it's worth checking out because it still carries over, some of the characteristics that you love with Slumber of Sullen Eyes onto it, and hopefully that gets a repress as well. But, it's fingers crossed, because again, it seems like without even giving it a second thought, the fan favorite will always be this. And all I'm saying is don't just sleep on just this album, but if you don't know of it and you're a death metal fan, you need to change it because it's essential death metal overall. And thankfully Savart finally did a repress for this. Again, go to Savart if you want to score a copy, because I guess that's like really the only place still carrying copies, if there's still any available. But as for the layout and packaging with this, Savart did a stellar job with it. So you have album artwork, backside with the track listings along with a band photo. Comes on a gatefold with the lyrics inside. This also includes a booklet that is the oral history of Demigod. It's just basically this big, long biography of the band, which is really cool, along with some interviews of them, so you get the whole history rundown of the album, which is a really cool addition that Savart did for it, along with this massive poster of the album artwork. And the vinyl edition I got comes on this white, red, pinkish swirl color, limited to, I believe, 200 copies. Finishing up next is going to be Depeche Mode with their 2001 full-length album, Exciter. I would say out of everything in the Depeche Mode discography that was released in the 21st century, this is their best work. As it's really their last album they've ever done that really captures, the sounds that they did when they started out, such as, either Violator, Some Great Reward, or even to an extent, I would say, Black Celebration. And it's because it still carries like that really depressing, sad sound. Because I remember talking to some people, and they would always say that Depeche Mode's at their best when they are the most depressed. It's the best way to put it. And Exciter is like the last time they've really captured that emotion. Songs on here like Dream On, The Sweetest Condition, Free Love, Comatose, which is my personal favorite song on the album, and Breathe. It still has like those, sounds of the 80s and 90s, but it's a bit more upbeat. It's a bit more, I don't want to say necessarily like happier, but like livened up. And while I'll always be a fan of Depeche Mode, I'll enjoy anything they put out, even their latest album that I'm pretty excited for. I believe it's going to be released, next month in July. Speaking of which, I'm really excited for the fact that I'm finally going to see them live this Halloween, actually. Cannot wait. I can finally cross Depeche Mode off my list of bands that I wanted to see live. But, yeah, I would say Exciter is the last album Depeche Mode's done that's like in the grade A category. And again, as I stated, the best thing they've done that was released in the 21st century. Finally got a copy of this because for the longest time I would always see it like at Newbury Comics, but it would be like this stupid inflated price. But after they did like some like sale for records like 25% off, figured it was finally time to score a copy of this banger right here. But yeah, as for the layout and packaging with it, you have album artwork. It's spot glossed to shit, as you can tell. Backside with the track listings. Comes on a gatefold with the members inside. Double LP that come on printed inner sleeve. So you have side A and B with thank you notes, along with side C and D with lyrics, and both just come on standard black vinyl. Second to last is going to be Defeated Sanity with their album Passages into Deformity. As of right now, this is the only Defeated Sanity album I have on vinyl, but god damn, this album is incredible. Technical, progressive, brutal death metal, if you want to call it all of that. I know it's a bunch of words to just, talk about a subgenre of music, but holy cow, this album is just such a burner. I remember when this album was released, I remember watching Infidel Amsterdam videos when I was just understanding what like death metal and extreme metal was. I remember he brought it up a handful of times, and just seeing the conversations of people talk about this album, they always hyped it up so much. And even though I'm not really that crazy for this style of music, and really I don't have much brutal death metal in my record collection, I truly feel like this album by Defeated Sanity, the sole purpose for them to make an album like this is to bitch smack anyone who assumes brutal death metal is cliche and just down-tuned chugging and like Cookie Monster vocals and that's all it offers. Because there is a lot to dive into with this album. I know, for example, all the members who played the instruments, like, guitar, bass, and drums, all influenced more by like jazz than anything else, and it really showcases the complexity of this band. Vocals, I would say, is the most like cliche thing about the band, but executed phenomenally, of course. But just honestly, the songwriting and composition, which is something you don't really hear people talk about with brutal death metal, this is just grade A stuff, honestly. And I would say from everything that I've seen in the brutal death metal scene and fan base, I've never once in my life seen anyone speak ill will of this album, and it's perfectly clear as to why when you listen to it. This is just like god tier, kind of like brutal death metal, and I truly do feel like it deserves all the recognition that it gets. So again, if you're someone who just thinks brutal death metal or anything in the realms of like technical brutal death metal is cliche and just redundant, it's because you have no idea that this album exists and you need to listen to it ASAP. But yeah, I'm very lucky to score a copy of this because, again, the record store that's near my area surprisingly had this for only $30, which is a steal of a price because Discog goes for like easily triple that. So very lucky to score a copy through this, through that record store is what I meant to say. But yeah, for the layout and packaging with this, you have album artwork, backside with the track listings. Comes on a gatefold with the lyrics inside, if you can even follow the lyrics being played on this album. And this vinyl pressing comes on semi-translucent green. And the last edition for this vinyl collection part is going to be the sophomore full-length album by Derniere Volonte. I believe it's Vife Sacre? Probably said that wrong. I don't know dick shit about French language, but what I do know is that Derniere Volonte is something that I have been obsessed over all year long. Ever since I discovered him around, like, I think it was either the end of January or the beginning of February, every day, I'm not exaggerating, I've listened to Derniere Volonte at least for 20 minutes every day, at the very bare minimum. I've been obsessed with this project. And with the sophomore full-length album, which will be the only album I talk about in this part because I've reached up to 15 records now, this is where Derniere Volonte technically isn't playing the style of music that I've been obsessing over. However, it's a mixture between like martial industrial, some forms of neoclassical, and that's really it. Everything past this album that I'll be talking about whenever I do the next vinyl collection part, that's where his work really shines, as it's a mixture between like post-industrial, synth pop, dark wave, neoclassical, neo-folk. Like, he plays around with a lot of different styles of music, and I'll dive more into that the next time I talk about him. But the first two albums, like I stated, it's more in the vein of martial industrial. Things are a bit more repetitive. It has to do more with atmosphere, ambience, and just overall, pacing of the repetitive nature of it. And though I would never say it's my favorite of his style of work, it's still really interesting to hear it, and it's still nothing I would say is deemed as like a chore to listen to, because I've never been really that crazy for like martial industrial music, as again it gets to be a bit repetitive. But yeah, I would tell you some of the songs to check out, but they're all in French, so I don't want to butcher the language anymore. But yeah, strongly recommend to anyone who wants to get into post-industrial. If you want a great example of this style of music, check out Derniere Volonte. And what's quite interesting about it is like some of the subgenres that people tag Derniere Volonte under because I really can't tell you what his influence exactly is because I don't know who to compare him to, which just makes him all the more interesting. I've even seen people call his style of music either like martial pop or military pop. It's just so good, and I know I'm hyping him up a lot, but you know, for listening to his work like every day for 5 months, I need to gush a little bit overboard with him. But yeah, as to where you can get a big bulk of the Derniere Volonte discography on the physical format, go to Tesco. That's where most of the copies are stored. As for the layout and packaging with this album, you have album artwork, backside with the track listings, comes on a printed inner sleeve, one side with the mastermind himself, other side with the lyrics, and this vinyl pressing comes on lime green. And that'll do it for this vinyl collection part. Like always, everything I talked about will be linked in the description below. And yeah, other than that, make sure, like always guys, you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated, and have a great day.